Before nations, maps, and cities, there was a journey. A crossing that didn't begin with footsteps, but with a thought. A quiet urge to go beyond. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens crossed deserts, forests, and oceans. No compass, guided only by hunger, curiosity, and memory. Each footprint told a story, each path, a bridge between past and future. This is the story of how we came to conquer the earth, not with strength, but with bonds, symbols, and imagination. Because walking wasn't just survival, it was becoming human. Around 300,000 years ago, under the golden skies of East Africa, a new species emerged, still fragile in the face of nature, but with something different in its eyes, something restless, creative, and dangerous. It was the beginning of Homo sapiens. For millions of years, the African continent was home to an astonishing variety of human species. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, all left their footprints across its vast plains and forests. But it was Homo sapiens, shaped by the unforgiving forces of the African wild, who would go on to change the world. The landscape was alive and unforgiving. Open savannas, seasonal rivers, dense forests, and predators at every turn. We lived in small, nomadic groups, following the paths of water and game. And our survival depended on one thing: cooperation. In the region we now call Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, our ancestors hunted with wooden spears, gathered roots and fruits, and slept beneath the shelter of rocks and trees. Did they speak? Maybe not like we do, but they certainly communicated. Gestures, glances, sounds, all were forms of language. There, something extraordinary began to unfold. For the first time, a human species started to represent the world around them, not just with tools, but with symbols, marks on bone, pigments on stone, traces of imagination. The symbolic mind was being born, and with it, culture. Over time, these groups developed increasingly sophisticated social strategies. They cared for the injured, protected the young, and shared their food. While other human species rose and vanished, Homo sapiens kept expanding, slowly but steadily. We had no fangs, no claws, but we had a brutal advantage. We could imagine. And for us, imagination was a way to survive. The first migrations were still to come, but everything began there, in the heat of Africa, in the silence of the savannah, when our ancestors looked to the horizon and, without knowing why, took the first step. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in relative harmony with the African landscape. They hunted, gathered, raised their children, and buried their dead in silent rituals beneath the vast savanna skies. Each generation repeated the steps of the one before, following the herds, searching for water, escaping predators. But slowly, something began to shift. A subtle impulse, perhaps unconscious, started to push us forward. A restlessness, a longing to go beyond. Why did we leave home? That question has echoed ever since the first Homo sapiens fossils were found outside of Africa. The answer isn't simple, but part of it is written in the rocks, in the sediments, in our DNA, and in the scars of the planet itself. It begins with the climate. During the Pleistocene, a period defined by cycles of glaciation and warming, Africa underwent dramatic environmental shifts. Tropical forests expanded and retreated. Lands that were once fertile turned dry and hostile. Between 130,000 and 70,000 years ago, drought cycles in East Africa were especially severe. Lakes like Tanganyika and Turkana partially dried up. Vegetation thinned out. Game became harder to find. Faced with scarcity, human groups were forced to move. Rivers became pathways, mountains, obstacles, and deserts, tests of endurance. Each journey was a gamble: find food and safety, or vanish. Migration became, above all, a strategy for survival. But there was something more. A drive that went beyond an empty stomach. Imagination. By around 100,000 years ago, our ancestors were already showing signs of symbolic behavior, using pigments, wearing ornaments, leaving marks on bone and stone. The symbolic mind, the ability to imagine what isn't there, had emerged. And with it came dreams, the urge to see what lay beyond the hill, the fascination with the unknown, the idea that something better might be waiting ahead. This imaginative power may have been our greatest engine for migration. Because Homo sapiens doesn't migrate only out of need, he migrates in search of possibility. In addition, Homo sapiens had a social structure that supported movement. We lived in flexible groups, able to split and reunite as needed. Unlike other human species, like the Neanderthals, who likely lived in smaller, more isolated clans, our ancestors maintained wider networks of contact. This constant exchange of tools, food, knowledge, and partners strengthened bonds between groups and made it easier to share survival strategies across new and unfamiliar territories. These networks grew over time. A group would leave in search of game, discover a new landscape, adapt, and thrive. Then came the signals, traces, paths, sounds, drawing others in, and so Homo sapiens began to spread. Fear didn't stop us. Curiosity pushed us forward. It was only a matter of time before our feet crossed the invisible borders of the continent. But before we left, we had to imagine that something lay beyond. Migration didn't begin with the first step. It began with a thought. The arid landscape of northeastern Africa stretches out before us. Ancient rivers cut through the cracked earth. Hot winds blow from the dunes toward the sea. There, where the continent ends, a new chapter in human history begins. For the first time, Homo sapiens is about to leave the cradle that shaped him. For decades, scientists believed that the first modern humans left Africa around 70,000 years ago. But recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that Homo sapiens crossed Africa's borders tens of thousands of years earlier. In caves like Skul and Kafze, in present-day Israel, fossils of Homo sapiens have been found dating back between 90,000 and 120,000 years. Even more surprising was the discovery in the Apodema cave in Greece. A team of researchers analyzed a skull found there and revealed it belonged to a Homo sapiens dated to around 210,000 years ago. This is the oldest known fossil of our species ever found outside of Africa. However, like other early groups that left the continent, this population vanished without leaving any genetic trace in modern humans. They were likely wiped out by climate shifts, isolation, or the presence of Neanderthals in the region. The migrations that truly shaped our destiny began around 70,000 years ago, when groups of Homo sapiens left the African continent in successive waves over time, crossing mountains, deserts, and rivers. Each group carried with them knowledge, tools, stories, and genetic legacies that would blend and evolve along the way. The Horn of Africa, today including countries like Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, and Somalia, became a strategic point. At certain times, sea levels dropped, revealing narrow passages that connected the African continent to the Arabian Peninsula through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It was through there that the world began to open. These groups didn't cross oceans with sophisticated boats. Evidence suggests they used simple means: hollowed-out logs, inflated animal skins, perhaps even swimming between islands during low tide. It was an uncertain crossing, but it was possible. And it was done. Those who made it found a new world, with landscapes, climates, and challenges entirely different from what they had known. The southern Arabian Peninsula, now arid, was once more humid and dotted with sparse vegetation. There was game, water, and shelter. Enough to keep moving forward. These early populations began to spread along the shores of the Red Sea, following coastal routes where they could fish and gather shellfish. This coastal migration strategy is one of the most widely accepted explanations in modern science for how Homo sapiens moved so rapidly toward Asia and Oceania. Cultural and biological diversity began to grow. Each group, separated by geography or distance, developed its own distinct traits. And yet, they all shared the same origin. These first steps beyond Africa were more than geographic journeys. They were evolutionary leaps. New challenges demanded new ideas. Art, music, myth. They may have begun to take shape here as ways to interpret and give meaning to the unknown. From this point on, the paths of Homo sapiens would branch out, northward, eastward, and into the unknown. Not in haste, but with persistence. And with each step, the species was drawing the map of its own story. From the moment our ancestors stepped beyond Africa, the paths of Homo sapiens began to branch out, like rivers in a delta. One of those paths led east, toward the vast Asian continent. There, a new chapter in the human journey began. In South Asia, the first Homo sapiens groups encountered landscapes as diverse as they were demanding. Arid plains, dense jungles, massive rivers, and to the north, towering mountain ranges that touched the sky. Asia wasn't just vast, it was many things at once, and it demanded new ways to live, to think, and to endure. Archaeological traces in places like Jwalapuram in India reveal that Homo sapiens were already living in the region over 60,000 years ago. What's most remarkable is that these stone tools were found both above and below a thick layer of volcanic ash, the result of the Toba supervolcano eruption around 74,000 years ago. And that tells us something extraordinary. These humans survived the cataclysm. They didn't just endure the darkness, the sudden cold, and the hunger. They adapted, they moved on. Following the Indian Ocean coast, other groups reached Southeast Asia, moving through regions that today include Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. There, every island and forest posed unique challenges. New predators, poisonous plants, unpredictable climates, but they also offered opportunities. Our ancestors learned to fish in mangroves, to gather unfamiliar fruits, and to craft tools from bamboo and local bone. In every harsh environment, they found ways to thrive. Farther north, a colossal barrier stood in their path: the Himalayan range. Thin air, bitter cold, extreme altitude. And yet, human groups crossed this natural frontier. How? The answer lies in the blood. Modern genetic studies show that populations in Tibet carry genes inherited from the Denisovans, an archaic human species that interbred with Homo sapiens tens of thousands of years ago. One of these genes, EPAS1, allows the human body to absorb oxygen more efficiently at high altitudes. These genetic exchanges weren't planned. They were the result of contact, coexistence, and interbreeding. In caves like Denisova in Siberia, fossils and fragments of DNA reveal this shared past. Asia was, in many ways, a vast laboratory of hybridization, adaptation, and diversity. The journey eastward was long, quiet, and profound. With each step, our ancestors moved farther from their origin and closer to their own multiplicity. As Homo sapiens spread across vast regions of Asia, one group of migrants dared to face a new kind of challenge: the open sea. For the first time in human history, water was no longer a boundary. It became a bridge. The journey toward Australia marked an extraordinary achievement. Unlike other regions of the world, there was never a land bridge connecting Southeast Asia to Australia. Even during the lowest sea levels, the ocean remained a barrier. And yet, around 65,000 years ago, Homo sapiens made it across. Archaeological evidence at the Majed Bebe site in northern Australia reveals stone tools, traces of pigments, and clear signs of human presence. These findings confirm that our ancestors didn't just arrive, they stayed, and they thrived. How did they do it? Even though the boats used by these early peoples have been lost to time, we know they crossed dozens of kilometers of open sea between islands. They likely used rafts made from wood, plant fibers, and stretched animal skins, following intentional routes based on observations of tides, winds, and the behavior of marine animals. This ability to plan and navigate reveals a high level of symbolic thinking, social coordination, and collective memory. Upon arriving in Australia, Homo sapiens encountered a truly unique land, untouched by humans and filled with colossal life forms. The Australian megafauna was made up of giant creatures, many of which had never faced a predator like the human being. Among them was the Diprotodon, a plant-eating marsupial the size of a hippopotamus and a distant relative of the modern wombat. The Megalania, a carnivorous monitor lizard that could grow up to 6 meters long, rivaling crocodiles in size. And the Geniornis, a flightless bird larger than an ostrich, likely similar in behavior to the dodo. The arrival of humans coincided with one of the largest extinction waves of the Pleistocene. Many scientists argue that systematic hunting pressure, combined with gradual climate change, led to the disappearance of over 80% of Australia's megafauna in just a few hundred years. The strategic intelligence of Homo sapiens, their ability to hunt in groups, build traps, and reshape landscapes with fire, disrupted the ecological balance of a continent that had never faced such pressure before. Even in the face of environmental transformation, humans didn't just survive, they evolved in their strategies. They began to shape the ecosystem to meet their needs, marking a new kind of relationship with the land, no longer as mere passengers, but as active agents of environmental change. They developed sophisticated techniques for managing the landscape, including the controlled use of fire to clear vegetation and attract animals, an ancient practice known as fire stick farming. This radically transformed local ecosystems and allowed early humans to control food cycles. More than just surviving, the human groups who settled in Australia developed a spiritual and symbolic relationship with the land. Aboriginal culture, considered by many scholars to be the oldest continuous cultural tradition on Earth, stands as a powerful testament to that connection. Through oral storytelling, rock art, and ceremony, Aboriginal peoples preserved a worldview in which every stone, tree, and river has a story, a role, a soul. The songlines, or dreaming tracks, are narrative trails that cross the continent, mapping ancestral roots, mythological encounters, and practical knowledge. By singing these lines, Aboriginal people not only navigate space, they connect to the land itself, as if each story were a living recreation of the landscape. This way of inhabiting the world, through story and deep belonging, reminds us that human migration was not only territorial, but existential. Our ancestors weren't just searching for new places, they were searching for meaning. The arrival in Australia, then, marks a double leap, physical and symbolic. It was one of the first great maritime adventures in human history, and the birth of one of the most sophisticated cosmologies our species has ever created. And it was only the beginning, because soon, the icy winds of the north would call another group of migrants toward an even greater challenge. After crossing savannas, tropical forests, and oceans, Homo sapiens faced a new and unforgiving challenge: the brutal cold of glacial Europe. Entering the European continent around 45,000 years ago was like stepping into another world, a world of ice sheets, harsh winters, dense forests, and unknown dangers. Nature left little room for error. The landscape was stunning, but deadly. Massive mammals roamed the frozen plains: mammoths, woolly rhinos, cave bears, giant elk, and saber-toothed cats. Snow and silence covered everything. To survive, Homo sapiens had to reinvent themselves. Creativity became their weapon. They learned to sew animal hides using bone needles and sinew, creating tight, insulating clothing. They built circular huts from mammoth bones and stitched hides, designed to withstand the cutting wind. They crafted specialized tools for cutting ice, scraping hides, and piercing bone. They developed long, slender blades, better suited for hunting in slippery, dense terrain. Adaptation wasn't just physical, it was cognitive and symbolic. Signs of complex organization began to emerge: task distribution, group hunting strategies, food sharing, and increasingly symbolic records of daily life. But the cold wasn't the only obstacle. Europe was already home to another human species, the Neanderthals. Present on the continent for over 300,000 years, they were highly adapted to the cold, with shorter, stockier bodies that retained heat more efficiently. Their technology was effective: axes, scrapers, and simple spears. And they had culture. They buried their dead, used pigments, built shelters, and hunted in groups. The encounter between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals was a turning point. For about 5,000 to 10,000 years, the two species coexisted in parts of Europe and the Middle East. Was there conflict? Probably. But there was also peaceful contact, exchange, mutual learning, and interbreeding. Today, modern genomes reveal that humans whose ancestors migrated out of Africa carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Meanwhile, populations with exclusively African ancestry carry little to no Neanderthal heritage, since those encounters occurred mostly in Europe and Asia after the Great Migration. This interbreeding left lasting marks on our biology. Some genetic variants linked to the immune system, metabolism, and even disease response come from Neanderthals. Other genes related to skin and hair also have mixed origins. And yet, the Neanderthals disappeared. Why? Scientists point to multiple causes: abrupt climate shifts, competition for resources, lower genetic diversity, outbreaks of disease brought by Homo sapiens, and even population absorption. What we do know is that around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals ceased to exist as a distinct species, and Homo sapiens moved on. Amid cold, scarcity, and isolation, something remarkable emerged: art. On the walls of caves like Chauvet, Altamira, and Lascaux, humans painted scenes of hunting, herds of animals, geometric symbols, and human hands stenciled in negative. Some of these paintings are over 35,000 years old. This art wasn't just aesthetic, it was ritual, memory, language. It represented the invisible, the spirit of animals, the fear of winter, the cycles of the moon, the connection to the dead. And it shows that even under extreme conditions, the symbolic mind flourished. There is also evidence of musical instruments, flutes made from bone and horn, ivory carvings, body ornaments, necklaces made of teeth and shells, and traces of pigments used on the body. Glacial Europe was also a cradle of imagination. In the face of adversity, Homo sapiens found a new identity. Not just survivors, but creators. And in that frozen landscape, many of the traits we now call human began to take root. The complex use of symbols, empathy for the group, art, ritual, and abstract thought. They didn't conquer Europe through force, but through intelligent adaptation and social cooperation. Where ice threatened, they made fire. Where there was darkness, they painted with light. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in the savannas, forests, and deserts of the Old World. They crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and survived eruptions and ice ages. But a new land, vast and unknown, still awaited on the far side of the world, the Americas. The arrival of Homo sapiens in the Americas is one of the most enigmatic and astonishing chapters of the human journey. For a long time, it was believed that the first groups crossed from Siberia into Alaska via a land bridge known as Bering Strait, formed during the last ice age, between roughly 26,000 and 19,000 years ago. This frozen, exposed corridor once connected two continents where there is now open sea. However, the most recent archaeological evidence challenges the idea of a single, late entry. Findings in Mexico, Chile, and even Oregon suggest that humans were already living in the Americas over 20,000 years ago, possibly even before the Bering Land Bridge was passable. How did they arrive so early? One of the most widely accepted theories today is the so-called Pacific coastal route. Human groups may have followed the edges of Siberia and Alaska, traveling in small boats and exploring ice-free coastal zones where they could hunt and fish. This theory helps explain how humans spread across the Americas so quickly. In a short span of time, geologically speaking, Homo sapiens had reached distant regions like the interior of Canada, the plains of the United States, the Amazon rainforest, and the southern tip of Patagonia. At the Monteverde archaeological site in Chile, remains of shelters, food, and tools have been found, dating back at least 14,500 years, indicating an established presence, well adapted to the local environment, long before previously thought. The crossing of the Americas wasn't just a march southward. It was a dance between climates, altitudes, and biomes. In North America, early humans encountered massive creatures like the woolly mammoth, mastodon, and saber-toothed cat. In South America, they faced the giant ground sloth, the glyptodon, and the toxodon, all part of the continent's impressive megafauna. As in Australia, the human arrival coincided with a period of mass extinction. The likely cause: a combination of climate shifts and hunting pressure. But Homo sapiens was not just a hunter. Over the millennia, we learned to cultivate, to store, and to transform the world around us. In the heart of the Americas, early agricultural practices emerged, with maize, beans, and cassava. And with them came the first settled villages, native cosmologies, and rituals that still echo today. The arrival in the Americas marked the end of Homo sapiens' planetary journey. From the Great Migration that began around 70,000 years ago, it took nearly 50,000 years for humans to reach every habitable continent and establish a global presence. But this achievement wasn't only geographical. It was cultural, symbolic, spiritual. Every land we crossed left a mark on us, just as we left a mark on every land. Long before agriculture, cities, and empires, Homo sapiens lived as eternal travelers. For tens of thousands of years, we were nomads. The world was our home, and the sky, our roof. But how did these early migrants live? What did they do, think, fear, and celebrate as they crossed savannas, deserts, and forests? Daily life for these groups was marked by movement, yes, but also by a deep connection to one another and to the land. Bands were small, usually made up of 20 to 40 individuals. They were extended families, adults, children, elders, and newborns, and every person played a vital role. Tasks were divided, but not rigidly. Women were gatherers, caregivers, midwives, food processors, and keepers of knowledge. Men, in many cases, were hunters, toolmakers, and trackers. But these roles were fluid, and survival depended on cooperation, not hierarchy. Knowledge was passed down orally. The experience of elders guided decisions. Stories carried rules, maps, warnings, and comfort. An elder who understood the seasons, the shape of clouds, or the trail of an animal was just as essential as the youngest, fastest hunter. Childhood was freedom and learning. Children grew up by watching, imitating, participating. They learned the world with their hands and eyes, and every game was a lesson in survival, community, and meaning. The spirituality of these groups emerged from observing the invisible. The wind that came before the rain, the rising moon, the buried bones of ancestors, the dreams. Early forms of religion were deeply tied to nature and the cycle of life. There were no temples. The temple was the mountain, the cave, the fire at the center of the circle. Rock art, which began to appear around the world some 40,000 years ago, was not mere decoration. It was language, a way to give form to the invisible, to tell stories of battles, hunts, encounters, and myths. Cave paintings, stone carvings, pigments on bone, all were expressions of a symbolic view of the world. Even while constantly on the move, these groups held a deep sense of belonging. They knew the paths, the scent of plants, the songs of birds. They knew when the river would rise, where the sun set on the equinox, and which star pointed the way to food. For nomadic peoples, land was not property. It was memory, ancestral path, living history. And so, for tens of thousands of years, we lived, in motion, yes, but in community, in wisdom, in balance. Homo sapiens didn't conquer the world with swift feet alone. We did it with strong ties. To walk is human. Migration is more than movement. It is desire, imagination, transformation. Today, we live in a world of rigid borders, passports, walls, and checkpoints. But we also live in a world where ideas, images, sounds, and stories travel across the planet in seconds. We still migrate, just in different ways. Through physical space, yes, but also through digital, emotional, and symbolic landscapes. We migrate when we change cities, languages, beliefs, or ideas. We migrate every time we imagine a different future. Some flee war, hunger, or climate change. Others migrate in search of meaning, opportunity, or a new beginning. The motivation remains the same as that of our ancestors: to survive, to belong, to evolve. The modern paradox is this: even with advanced technologies and global networks, we are still deeply shaped by the instinct to move. We still feel that ancestral call, the one that once led us beyond the last hill. Science has shown that all people, from every continent, descend from the same group that once left Africa. That connects us more deeply than any flag, language, or belief. Migration is our shared origin, and perhaps it is also our destiny. In a time of global warming, humanitarian crises, and artificial intelligence, the impulse to adapt and move will remain the driving force of our species. Because we are still migrating through space, through ideas, through the digital, the journey hasn't ended. It has simply changed shape.